Unfortunately, Rupert couldn't be here because there was a conflict that he had with interop events being scheduled at the same time as the workshop. Maybe next year the planners can work together so that that doesn't happen, so he can attend. So as far as the agenda, we'll just kind of briefly review the charter of the work group, and then kind of give us a status update of what we accomplished over the last year and the things that we're working on at the moment. Do a little bit of a brief review of our process and possible changes that we're thinking about doing. We typically do this every year to look at how we're working and is there anything that we should change to make things better. Talk a little bit about the process that we use for validation and testing of the OpenFabrics software. We do rely a lot on Rupert's folks in the interop lab that has a whole host of equipment of all the different vendors, and we'll talk a little bit about how that's utilized. And then briefly talk about the futures that we're thinking about for moving forward with OFED and roadmap, and then just open it up for discussion and get feedback from the community on anything that we're doing that's good or anything that we're doing that's bad that I can take back to the EWG. So the charter of the group, this was formed at the very start of OpenFabrics, and we had all this various pieces of software that people were developing, but we realized that we needed a way to put it all together in one complete package and test it all as one entity so that we had something that was hardened and could be used by the industry. And we also needed to make it work on various different versions and distributions of Linux, so do backports to the various kernels and such. And then the comprehensive testing, which I already mentioned. And then we put it together in a package with an installer and release notes and things like that. We have a process for bug tracking through Bugzilla. So if people have issues, they can report it there, and then we can address it in the next versions of the OFED. It also provides a platform where we can do innovation and experimentation before things go upstream or before things get integrated into the standard Linux distributions, which most of the distributions have their own versions integrated. But the OFED package still provides us a way to do early experimentation and let people try it in an integrated package so that we can get it right before it goes upstream. And then it's also used in the interop testing lab for the logo program, so they rely on it heavily for that. So what we did last year, so the releases that we did last year, we did an update to the 3.5, which was 3.51, 3.52, and we're currently working on the next major update, which is moving to a new kernel base based on the kernel.org 3.12 kernel. Our numbering scheme now mirrors what kernel base it's based on, and then the dashes are just updates to those for bug fixes or adding new support for backports for newer distros and stuff. We also, this was the first year that we used our new process of, allowing people to have experimental branch releases for new things that are not upstream. We made, and we'll talk about this in the process section in a bit, but we made a change a few years ago where we decided to base all of the kernel components on the upstream Linux kernel rather than just having a separate version of the kernel code that was newer in OFED that didn't match upstream. And we made a process change to base the kernel components on the upstream piece, but at that time we realized that we still wanted the ability to have innovation and experimental things be able to be used by people before they're upstream. So we did allow this ability to have experimental branch releases, which we did for the Intel Xeon 5, and we've done a few of those in the last year. So the first one was OFED 3.5-1. It was Not very much new features, but it was primarily just to support the newer Red Hat EL 6.4 release that came out after 3.5. That was just a quick update for that. Then we went on to 3.5-2, which was released in December. Again, we added support for newer the distros SLUS 11 SP3. We did remove an older compat DAPL library, which was the DAPL 1.0 support, because after we surveyed all of the current DAPL customers, they had all moved to the 2.0 version, so that was no longer needed. And then we did do various, we pulled in a bunch of newer packages that the individual maintainers had released, and that's the list of them. So that was 3.5-2. We're currently working on 3.12, which is moving the kernel base up to the 3.12 kernel.org. It's currently at an RC1, and RC2 will be soon. I think the only thing that we're waiting for now is a few more bug fixes for the Chelsea driver that they're still working with the upstream, and they wanted to make sure that they were correct with the upstream before we pull them into this. The other thing that we added in for 3.12 is that now the new Mellanox Connect IB MLX5 driver was upstream, so we pulled that in. And also there's a new NIC from Emulex, a new Rocky driver, and so that's included. And again, we pulled in a lot of updates, in the user space packages from DAPL and a bunch of the diagnostic and OpenSM, I believe, and things like that for test. And this was just a summary of our work that we did as this first experimental branch release mechanism. We released a version based on the 3.5 kernel that added some new experimental code that allows direct access to the InfiniBand fabric from an Intel Xeon Phi that works with the Intel MPSS package that comes with the Xeon Phi. We started to upgrade that capability to get the newer 3.5-1. We were halfway through that when OFED 3.5.2 got released, and decided to only just leave that at a beta stage and just move up to 3.5-2 so that we were on the current release. So that's under development, and I think an RC of that should come out pretty soon. I think we're just waiting for a couple more changes on that. And then on the process standpoint, as I mentioned before, we had changed our process to base the kernel components on the upstream kernel, primarily because we got a lot of feedback from the community that there was a big divergence between what was upstream and thus what was in the distros and what we had in the OFED packages. So we decided to do that, and I'll talk in a little bit later on how that has helped us align better with the distros, but we did get some feedback that having branch releases for experimental features was causing more fragmentation, not less. And so what we want to do is kind of reintegrate the ability to put experimental features into OFED, but not have them enabled by default. They would have to be enabled by a specific configuration mechanism. So they're clearly identified as something that if people want to just use production code, they shouldn't enable these new features and only use them if they're using the new stuff that's not yet upstream. And that would reduce the fragmentation in the number of various OFED packages that we release. So the first one that we're planning to do that with is with this experimental code that we did for the Xeon Phi. And I'll talk a little bit later about, probably in the next version of OFED, we'll try to integrate those two. We talk a little bit about the validation that we do. We do a lot of work with the interop group and the logo program. They have various configurations of server equipment at UNH IOL with hardware from all the various vendors. you can read on the slide. They've got, iWarp 12 host, InfiniBand 18, Rocky. So you can see that we have a pretty good, not huge in size, but a lot of various, different vendors things, so we can all, make sure that there's interoperability and such. It's tested with multiple versions of OpenFabrics OFED releases so that we can verify that there's interoperability between the various versions. We haven't broke anything there. And then the lab has a good, PXE environment so that they can fairly quickly and easily switch various versions of Linux distros and various versions of OFED to do all that testing in a more automated fashion. And then this is the list of various protocols that they test up there. And this is just a package that Rupert gave, or a diagram that Rupert gave me of their current lab configuration. So as you can see, they have, equipment from, Mellanox hardware to the various Chelsio and Intel iWarp hardware, Rocky, and now we have, of course, 2 different vendors that are doing Rocky, so having the ability to do interoperability testing there is very important now. I won't go through this in detail, but that just gives you an idea of the various components that we test OFED against. So moving forward, as I mentioned before, probably we will add this Xeon Phi support rather than having a completely separate package branch release for 3.12. We'll just include it into the 3.12-1 package that'll be released later this year. We also know that there is a Red Hat EL7 distribution that's coming along, and we'll need to have backport support for that. And then, it'll be, cherry picking any upstream fixes that are needed. And the release timing of that will probably depend on when the actual, Red Hat EL7 is finally released, because we can't do our final testing until we get their final package. So that's, the near-term roadmap. We have started discussions now about after 3.12, what should be the next major OFED update, and I guess we would like some feedback from the community as to how often we should try and do that. Of course, every time we do that, it takes resources from every different vendor to do backports of the newer kernels and things like that. I think a couple years ago we had discussed maybe only doing a major update once a year. Although in the EAWG, when we had this discussion, I think Steve Wise was mentioning that he might like to see it a little sooner than once a year, maybe every 6 months. But you have a.
So one of the problems you're facing,
yes,
is that one of the customers is upgrading Mellanox OFED stack regularly. Now, what that problem it brings is our module is built against a later distribution.
Okay.
And so every time a customer upgrades the OFED stack, we provide new drivers for our module, which is not feasible scalable. So which means if we can align the OFED releases at a frequency which is comfortable with most customers, so and it includes the latest features provided by, say, Mellanox or Emulex or whoever. So I think we'll have to balance that out. Otherwise, it's going to be a challenge for people like us who have to support these technologies.
I understand. I hear your pain. There's, there is still fragmentation. Mellanox has their own version repackaged, or version of the OpenFabrics software, and they've even got additional features in their version for some of the newer features that are in their hardware that are not upstream yet. The Intel folks repackage OpenFabrics and do distributions of that too. In a perfect world, we would only have one, but I don't necessarily know how to solve that problem. There are definitely business reasons and good business reasons why a specific company might want to do their own to add additional features that are not open source and things like that. So I don't know how to solve that problem. I mean, I think what we can try and do is reduce fragmentation as much as possible. Some of the things that we've done have helped there, but there is still some fragmentation. Let me back up on that. On the, for example, on the distro alignment, you know, when we get to 3.12, it's going to be fairly close to what's in the distros, both for Red Hat EL7 and for SLES 12 that are coming out this year. Our HAL EL7 is based on the 3.10 kernel, and then the upstream user space packages. And SLES 12 is actually based on the 3.12 kernel with just the user space package. So in the SLES world, OFED 3.12 and SLES 12 are essentially identical, other than if we do an update release later, 3.12-1 or something that has a few other bug fixes. So that convergence has been pretty good. And so for the people that mostly want to do stuff in production, they can just use what's in the distro. As far as, you know, realigning or try to, get the vendors to all agree to just merge back into one OFED package for all the different pieces of hardware and not release their own. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that or not. That's a tough nut to crack because of various, different business reasons of the companies. But, we can just try to keep up the best we can. And I understand your pain when that happens. I actually have the same pain like on the Xeon Phi front. I have to support working with the Mellanox OFED as well as the upstream OFED as well as the Intel OFED, et cetera. So, so as far as the timing of, how often we would do a major release, but anybody else have any, feedback or comments on how often they would like to see us move to a new kernel rev, once a year, once every 6 months? I mean, one of the thoughts that I had is what usually drives a major upgrade of the OFED release has a lot to do with, and we usually have discussions in the EWG of, what's coming next? What are people working on that might warrant wanting to do a new update, especially going to a newer kernel? So what are new innovations that are going in that we want to make sure we have a release to support? Or what new user space packages are being developed that we want to get in the hands of customers in an OFED package. One of the things that we, discussed over the last day and in the BOF from the OFI WG is, they're tentatively planning on trying to get something ready maybe towards the end of the year, whatever it turns out to be, extended verbs or live fabric or whatever. So maybe that would be impetus for, wanting to do another major OFED release. But if anybody else has any, suggestions or ideas there, let us know, or definitely come to the WG meetings and, give us your input. As far as, how to contribute, this is on the slides there. You can join the EWG mailing list, come to the meetings. Of course, all the general kernel development happens on Linux RDMA, and the list of maintainers is in a file here that you can get to, and then bugs can be reported to us through the Bugzilla. Questions? Okay, good, thanks.